Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar covering international climate change policy and CCS. This session will include live updates rather, from the UNFCCC's Bonn Climate Change Conference, featuring the Institute's Senior International Climate Change Policy Lead, Noora Al Amer, who is joining us from Bonn, and she'll chime in very shortly. My name is Ruth Gebremitin, and I am the EMEA Senior Events and Communications Lead, and I will be facilitating today's discussions. For those who might not be familiar with us, the Global CCS Institute is an international climate change think tank whose mission is to accelerate the deployment of carbon capture and storage, which is a vital technology needed to tackle climate change and deliver climate neutrality. If we have time, we will attempt to answer a few audience questions. You could submit your questions using the Q&A function on the Zoom control panel that you see at the bottom of your screen there. And in the coming days, a recording of this webinar will be made available on the Institute's website. So, serving as a midway point ahead of COP, the Bonn Climate Change Conference convenes the UNFCCC's permanent subsidiary bodies, which includes the Subsidiary Body for Scientific and Technological Advice and the Subsidiary Body for Implementation. Working in tandem to address climate change impacts and issues relevant to both bodies, Bonn is a key part of the UNFCCC process. As an observer, the Institute is on the ground to follow key climate talks and negotiations and taking part in CCS knowledge sharing opportunities. Joining us today to share key updates from the crucial conference and impart a few takeaways is Noora Al Amer, our Senior International Climate Change Policy Lead with the Institute. Hi, Noora.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi. So Bonn is organized, as I mentioned, by the UNFCCC, and it takes place roughly 6 months ahead of COP. For those who might not be familiar, can you perhaps highlight the significance of Bonn and what happens there?
Yes. Well, first, I want to thank you, Ruth, for this webinar. I think our last webinar together was in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I think we heard a lot of positive feedback from there. So it's great to be tete-a-tete with you once again. So as you said, it is an important checkpoint on the way to the next COP. What we see is parties negotiating mechanisms for implementing what was agreed in the previous COP and then working on language to pave the way towards the next COP. Today we have in this conference over the last 2 weeks, about 6,000 people is the number that I heard. These are from national delegations and civil society organizations. And as you also highlighted, we as Institute attend as a registered observer. And we are part of a group called the Business Industry and NGO Group, known as the BINGO. And we meet every morning and we discuss the state of play of negotiations. We also have one-on-one meetings and bilaterals with different groups. So we've been speaking to Jim Ski, the chair of the IPCC last week. We also spoke to delegates from the European Union on Article 6, the US on topics of finance, as well as coalitions like the Umbrella Group and the G77 and China. And here we discuss outcomes and we talk about next steps and our expectations as BINGO. So this is done as well as our statements in the plenaries and other discussions.
Yeah, you mentioned that our last touch base was post-COP. For those who might not be familiar with what happened there, can you maybe perhaps touch on what some of those outcomes were and highlight how that will be carried over during the conversations at Bonn?
Yes, definitely. So, COP28, when it came to negotiations, we had quite a global shift when it comes to the global stock take and what was agreed there. So we had the decision to transition away from fossil fuels, but it also included CCUS, particularly in hard-to-abate sectors, as part of the list of zero and low emission technologies for parties to take action on and accelerate. So following these decisions this year, countries are preparing the third round of NDCs, which are due in February 2025. And what we've seen in our tracking of the NDCs is year-on-year increase of the inclusion of CCS in these NDCs. So we really do look forward to the next round of NDCs with the political signal of CCUS included there, but also because this round of NDCs is the last round before that critical milestone of 2030, where we really need to ensure significant cuts in greenhouse gas emissions, as well as an overall increase of environmental stewardship on our planet.
So you mentioned NDC.
I'll also mention a few other
Yeah.
things. We also saw progress last year in COP28 on the mitigation work program, where CCUS was one of the main themes of the work program. And there was a decision in a published report by the Secretariat, and that included a summary of country views on key findings, opportunities, barriers for the technology. And this was based on the dialogue we had last year. And there we had our CEO, Jared Daniels. We also had IEA GHT General Manager Tim Dixon providing technical expertise to support countries on their views of CCS. So looking into this year, the mitigation work program now has a theme of cities, buildings, and urban systems. And there we definitely see a role for CCS as they relate to the cement and concrete industry, as well as the role of CCS networks and urban systems. So we've been working on submissions. We actually have another submission due imminently, and we hope to try and put CCUS back on the agenda of the mitigation work program. And while I'm talking about that, another interesting development of the mitigation work program in the negotiations over the last week was this push to involve how to involve the financial element of that and that component, how to weave that into the program and really make it investment focused. So I think also when we look at the last year and the run up to Bonn, now we also saw a lot of developments outside the realm of UNFCCC. So we had the Carbon Management Challenge, and the last count is 21 country joiners, with a North Star of managing 1 gigaton or more of carbon management projects annually. So in COP28, this was supported by the presidency there, with a very high-level ministerial event with the co-sponsors, with notable participation from the now retired John Kerry and Xi Zhenhua from the US and China, along with many different countries of varying national circumstances. And it really showed it really just showed the diversity of the technology and carbon management itself. And then just in May, we had the G7, which reinforced those two outcomes. So the global stocktake outcome on CCS and the carbon management challenge as well. So it did mention both of those among many other things. So lots of interesting developments for the technology.
So I want to take a step back there. You mentioned the carbon management challenge. Can you perhaps contextualize what that initiative even is for some folks? And when you say new joiners, who are those new joiners, and are emerging economies or countries with emerging economies being supported in that process?
So yes, sure. So the Carbon Management Challenge, it was launched at last year's Major Economies Forum by President Joe Biden, and it as we worked last year, it was to really build momentum on the challenge and add new joiners. So, for example, just off the bat, when it first was launched, we had countries like the US, the UK, Canada, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, among others. And then, for example, when we got to the G20 in Goa, we had countries like Sweden and Brazil join. And then when we got to COP28, we had more country announcements from Romania, from Senegal, from Kenya. So we really have managed to really see that story and see those 21 countries. I think also it's important to mention it includes the European Commission as well. So what it is basically a vision forward and a North Star of collectively managing 1 gigaton of CO2 or more annually, and that includes through CCS, CCUS, and CDR. So the wide range and full scope of carbon management technologies.
And with respect to NDCs, those are the nationally determined contributions that are submitted by various countries to make sure that they're in line with Paris Agreement targets. Would you say that's promising in the context of CCS specifically?
So because CCS is included in the global stocktake and its outcomes, we do expect that is very promising in itself. So definitely, I would say that really sets the context and sets the stage. I think, you know, we really are looking forward to powerful blueprints that use CCS, particularly in hard-to-abate sectors that are designed appropriately and can support the needs of the economy. And I think particularly when you look at emerging economies, there's two things I want to say there that's happening now is one is the new quantified goal on climate finance, which is dubbed the NCQG. Indeed, the COP29 is dubbed as the finance COP. So this is a very big part of that, and the technology mechanism. So first on finance, you know, we're looking for a new global goal for funding mitigation adaptation projects. And we had the previous goal of 100 billion, which was met for the first time. This was primarily by developed countries channeling climate finance to developing countries. So now with this new collective goal, we're seeing quite an intense atmosphere and very divergent views. Some parties want to focus on what the new number is. The latest text shows ranges from $1.3 trillion to $400 billion. We also have various views on who should pay. So, you know, the world looks very different to what it did in 1992 when countries were put into two different camps with different financial obligations. And what we're hearing is also the need to include all sorts of financial flows from different sources, at the same time while reassuring developing countries who are the recipients of this fund that they will be getting the support that they need. So it looks like, based on the last consultation, that this does need to move towards a higher political level, because I think there's a bit of there's various issues that really need to be solved on that level. The second I would say is the technology mechanism. And we're seeing a lot of focus actually this year on technology needs assessments and their importance, and technology action plans, which are derived from these needs assessments, where a country prioritizes their technologies. And this is really key for CCS because it helps get you from paper to project in a developing country. So I was in a side event last week that just focused on making NDCs 3.0 ambitious and investment ready through these technology action plans, where they were actively talking about the need to marry these plans with NDCs. Just on a desktop review, I've seen two countries that have mentioned CCS in their TNAs. One is Thailand and one is Trinidad and Tobago. And this should ring a bell because foundationally, Trinidad and Tobago, it had its successful application for what is known as the Readiness Fund from the Green Climate Fund last May, and a lot of this was done because it had CCS included in its TNA, and from there you can move forward. So I think also when we in this design of the next round of NDCs, how this can be reflective of the TNA and the TAP. And really kind of bringing those two worlds together can really help in getting the right investment together. Actually, this morning, there was an informal consultation on the linkages between the technology mechanism and the finance mechanism. So it's definitely something parties are thinking about. But unfortunately, we're seeing similar divides from the finance room being carried over to that room as well. So we'll have to see how that progresses.
Speaking of divides and issues that kind of need to be resolved, Article 6.4 was kind of still a sticking issue from last year that wasn't exactly managed in the way that we had hoped. Could you perhaps contextualize what that was about and what we might potentially see in the upcoming COP, and if there's any conversations happening at Bonn, please share those as well.
Yes, definitely. So Article 6, so as well as the operationalization, one of the main issues for CCS when it comes to Article 6 is under the Article 6.4 Supervisory Body, the removals recommendation, where we've had 2 years of rejected proposals. That being said, we have a very keen group of negotiators and a presidency that really wants to get this over the line this year. So on removals in the supervisory body meetings that happened actually before Bonn, we saw an expansion of the work on removals. So we're expecting documents detailing the inclusion of transboundary storage. We're also looking at more work on the sustainable development aspects of removals and technological removals, safeguards criteria, and a new annex to include positive and negative impacts of them based on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The first day here in Bonn, we also had an Article 6 stakeholder engagement session where we engaged on outstanding issues on removals, such as sharing responsibilities of reversal risk and identifying the most appropriate tools. So I think there's a lot happening there. There is sort of that negotiation on the actual modalities of Article 6 and all that, but then also separately and more concerned with CCS is that removals piece and how that will develop and what they will decide there.
Yeah. I mean, of course, there are the formal negotiations that occur. You mentioned bingo. How is knowledge sharing happening at Bonn, and how can folks get involved?
So knowledge sharing, I would say there's different forums for knowledge sharing, and I would say that a lot of knowledge sharing can also happen outside of Bonn, and there's different ways that this happens, and here we have side events that can also form a basis for different sharing of knowledge. I would say mainly in a conference like this, I think a big part of it is that negotiations aspect of making sure we get the right, get us in the right track to achieving and adopting decisions in the next COP. And definitely knowledge sharing is part of that and something that we can do. So the mitigation work program is one of those platforms that we can knowledge share, and that's something the Institute has done. And then in different levels, whatever stage a agenda item is at, there are different opportunities for knowledge sharing. So it really depends.
Yeah, just one more question here before we pivot to the audience Q&A. I know we only have about 10 minutes more on the clock. So COP29 is going to be held in Baku. It's going to be in Azerbaijan. You mentioned finance being a topic that's being discussed. What are the priority items that you expect in Baku, and what are you hearing from folks at Bonn?
Yeah,
and
so
specifically
Baku,
if CCS specifically will be, a hot topic as it was in COP28.
So with Baku, we actually had their head of delegation in one of our bingo meetings last week. So we got to actually directly ask the head of delegation what is the expectations for CCS. At the moment, he did speak about their national oil company and how they're really looking into the CCS aspect, and they have a decarbonization plan. But we haven't really seen anything other than that specifically on CCS. When it comes to negotiations, I don't think that there could be more areas for development, but I think we also already have the global stocktake, and it's really more about implementing and getting countries to actually include CCS in their TNAs, in their NDCs. On a political level, CCS, I think, has been addressed very much. So we have the carbon management challenge, and even through there is a massive opportunity for international collaboration. Just in last year's mitigation work program, for example, I think could provide a lot of interesting, can provide a pool of information for the carbon management challenge. So we were looking at finally seeing what a wide scope of countries are thinking about CCS, countries that don't usually talk about CCS, what they think about CCS, where they're at. And while we have significant projects in developing countries, case in point, Brazil, we still have a long way to go when it comes to helping societies and countries to get CCS off the ground, especially in an inclusive way. We heard a lot of, some modest countries who have taken the UN stage talking about the need and wanting to learn about CCS and integrate it into their climate plan, but not sure how to do that. So I think particularly countries in the developing world need to be empowered with the appropriate information about CCS technologies so they can make informed decisions through their NDCs, which can also be cross-referenced, synergized with their technology action plans. So I would say that it really is time to implement and to really include CCS and NDCs. When it comes to the negotiations, there's definitely areas for discussion, areas where we can progress on the technology in the different platforms and forums. But definitely it is very much a country-driven process, and that's how the Paris Agreement was designed. It is a very party-driven process. So parties themselves need to say that they need the technology and include it in their reporting.
Right. I'm going to pivot to audience questions here. I think most of them we've touched on Article 6, and you've kind of unpacked what's happening on the finance front. Here's a good one. So what is the feeling in Bonn this time as regards to CCS skeptics? Do you hear lots of criticisms on the ground, or have their positions shifted? And that's from Yuho.
So I don't know. Maybe I'm lucky this year. I haven't heard much criticism. I think I think we've kind of shifted from what technologies are okay and what are not okay because of the global stocktake has just covered that. So I haven't seen anything about CCS actually. I've been hearing actually in the plenary we had different sort of protests on different issues, not on CCS in particular.
And another question is about innovations in the CCS field. Is that being unpacked at all or discussed?
Innovation in CCS?
Yeah.
So definitely under the Technology Executive Committee, this is one of the work streams. So it would be part of an ongoing process that happens outside the realm of the negotiations in these 2 weeks, which is basically a incubator to come up with decisions and mandates. So, but there definitely is a stream under the Technology Executive Committee on innovation systems.
Okay. Let's see what else we have here. Have there been any discussions, I guess, just broadly on accelerating deployment around the globe? Are there players talking about financing projects and just any concerns around where the money will come from?
So these kind of discussions are not necessarily, there's no appropriate outlet, I would say, for these sort of discussions. We don't see much in that regard, although, obviously we have the finance negotiations, but that's a whole different political issue. So.
Okay. And I'll take one last one. It's a bit broad, so maybe not directly related to what's happening at Bonn, but do we still even need CCS if there are renewables? So I guess what is the value of CCS?
We still need CCS.
Yes, what is the value?
Actually, okay, well, I'm glad you asked this question because actually there was I have an old contact of mine who was one of a very key person, especially in the 90s when it comes to the climate negotiations. And, he's been through the whole spectrum and all the years, and he just recently retired. And I asked him, like, was it worth it, this whole thing? Because it really is a lot of back and forth and, it's a big tug of war. And, was it worth it? And he actually said to me, and I really took it to heart. And he said, actually, I think the main thing we need to focus on now is CCS and hard to abate sectors and nature restoration. And that's what his take was on what needs to happen now. And that's someone who has 40+ experience in climate policy, and really understands the ins and outs of it. So, I mean, definitely, I think renewables, it's definitely part of the mix. It's an all of the above approach. We have the renewables pledge as well, which has a lot of momentum. And so I think all these things happen in tandem, but I think it's it's important to note that the global stocktake says CCUS, particularly in hard to abate sectors. So in those sectors, specifically, is where we really need to buckle down and invest and really get us curbing emissions by 2030.
Maybe I'll take one question, then we'll just end it here. One more question here is there a recognition that CCS needs encouraging by governments with helpful legislations and regulations? I guess, is there a recognition with that Bonn and I guess broadly with the stakeholders that you interact with just on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, so there definitely is that need. And as I said before, this is something that we've heard from the developing countries, is something that they would really really want to learn more about and really want to increase their capacity. So this is definitely something that I think developed countries can help with and provide that you know that cooperation and it was something I remember in the mitigation work program that a lot of countries such as Japan, the US were very open to providing the knowledge sharing tools for countries that didn't know so much about CCS legislation and everything that comes with that. So I think the main thing from these negotiations is it just really serves for me as a reminder of how much support is needed in the developing world on these technologies and how much we need to do when it comes to financing, how much we need to do on capacity building, how much we need to do on helping create appropriate legislation, and also understanding the technology needs of that country and how CCS can help meet various issues that they have and areas that they need to curb when it comes to their emissions.
Right. And you still have a few more days left. You're not wrapped up yet. Will you be writing a brief for the Institute afterwards, just once everything's concluded?
Yes, so I am writing a brief right after this conference. So it'll be just more of the technical sort of rundown of what happened. So it'll include, some of the things I talked about today, plus on response measures, on the just transition. So these are things that also are directly and indirectly related to CCS. So I'll go more into those as well. And I'm also writing a thought leadership piece on an in-depth analysis of CCS and NDCs and looking at how just to provide a source of information for countries as we move on to the next round of NDCs.
Right. Thanks, Noora, and looking forward for that brief.
Thank you so much.
Apologies to those folks who we did not get a chance to answer all of your questions, but hopefully most of those will be addressed in the upcoming brief that Noora will be authoring soon. Ellen, if I can get the final slide up here. Yeah, perfect. So it's been an interesting session, but unfortunately that's all the time we have. On behalf of the Global CCS Institute, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for being here, and Noora for her insights and giving us some of those takeaways that are happening at Bonn. If you'd like to learn more about CCS and international policy, you can read our Global Status of CCS report, but we also have reports that unpack what happened at our previous COP28, also written and authored by Noora, just to give you some context as to what occurred last year and what might be carried over in the forthcoming COP. If you're on social media, please feel free to follow us or interact with us at Global CCS is our handle. And if you have any additional questions, you can contact us directly by emailing info@globalccsinstitute.com. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you. Goodbye.